For thousands of years, construction as a facet of worship has been a part of almost all religions. The temple structure at the site in Turkey known as Göbekli Tepe dates from 8000 BCE. The oldest sections of the Jantia temple complex on the island of Malta were built around 3600 BCE. Stonehenge in England around 2400 BCE. In the modern day, Jehovah's Witnesses are no different from other faiths in this regard. They have built countless thousands of structures. These range from modest community meeting centers to sprawling regional and international complexes housing thousands of workers. At times, observing the constant construction projects becomes confusing for Jehovah's Witness members. The core doctrine of the religion states the present world's end can be expected at any moment. In 2020, Stephen Lett, a member of the governing body that directs Jehovah's Witnesses, expressed to members just where we are in the world's timeline.
So the events unfolding around us are making clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
It can be perplexing for active witnesses when the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, one of the main corporations used by the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, begins construction projects that will not be completed until years into the future. Does this mean the end is not as close as originally thought? At the 2021 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, governing body member Anthony Morris addressed this point head-on.
Now, just something to address the feelings that some have, and these are beautiful friends, different ones worshiping Jehovah for many decades, and we're only human. You know, and it's the truth, but we're only human. So one brother wrote and appreciated his sincerity, and he said, during the annual meeting of 2019, the Ramapo project was announced. And if I remember right, it was stated that the project would be complete in a few years. With recent Watchtower articles telling us that we are in the last of the last days, beautiful expression, but words are powerful. It seemed a little disappointing that this may push Armageddon off a few years. This was his sincere concern, really. And you know he's not alone. They're only human.
After noting that a number of witnesses are wondering about this, Morris gave the explanation for these long-term construction projects.
The governing body wants all of you to know, including those that'll see it later, that we are determined to remain active and to faithfully deliver spiritual food at the right time. We are also looking beyond the last days. You're getting that message. Let me expound on that thought. Looking beyond the last days. And this is a quote from the Proclaimer's book, and I treasured it when the book came out, and a lot of work went into that publication. But there, referring to God's people, it stated, you know, there's a lot of international construction going on at the time, too, if you were in the truth then. Quoting it now, with the help of Jehovah's Spirit, they, God's people, want to give the greatest witness possible during the time that remains before Armageddon. They are convinced that God's new world is very close at hand, and they have faith that they will survive as an organized people into the New World under the rule of God's Messianic kingdom. Now, please note the rest of this quote. It is also their hope that perhaps, keyword, many of the fine facilities that they have built and dedicated to Jehovah will continue to be used after Armageddon as centers from which knowledge of the only true God can be diffused until it truly fills the earth, end quote. Beautiful thought. Right there. Still valid. So, in harmony with what the faithful slave said then, the faithful slave now says many of the projects that are being worked on now, like Ramapo and the Good News According to Jesus video series, may, or perhaps, will carry over into the New World to assist the great crowd with the work ahead and perhaps including resurrected ones. That's comforting. That's just, you have to let that sink in.
In this intriguing clip, Morris argues that even if the project to build Watchtower Movie Studios in Ramapo, New York is completed only a day before Armageddon arrives, it will still have been a good use of time and resources. The reason is that the facility could very well be used by witnesses after Armageddon. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that in the post-Armageddon period, countless billions of humans will be resurrected from the dead. All of them will need to be taught about Jehovah. The religion of Jehovah's Witnesses has now existed for more than 140 years. So we might wonder, did past leaders of the organization ever embark on large construction projects which they pictured as being used after Armageddon? Were their complexes built to survive the end of this present world and serve as the nucleus of a new world after the earth had been cleansed of wickedness by God? If so, how did Jehovah's Witnesses use these past properties? Are they still used by witnesses today? What was the life cycle of these complexes? And what can this teach us about current and future building projects of the Watchtower Society? Today we'll examine a case study from Jehovah's Witness history, the complex called Kingdom Farm. When you think about farms owned by Jehovah's Witnesses, your first thought is probably Watchtower Farms, a sprawling facility in Wallkill, New York. Located about 2 hours north of New York City, the Watchtower Farms property was purchased in 1963. It began life as an actual farm providing food to the Watchtower Society's global headquarters, located at the time in Brooklyn, New York. But the mission of Watchtower Farms was soon expanded to other areas, notably printing religious literature. However, Watchtower Farms was not the first farm owned by the Watchtower Society. 30 years earlier, the Society had purchased a 600-acre farm just north of Lansing, New York. Lansing was about 230 miles from the Watchtower Society's headquarters in New York City. It is located in the Finger Lakes region of New York State.
I want the job. I really do. It's just the rest of my family's in the Finger Lakes right now. I'm supposed to be in the Finger Lakes right now. I told them I was on a hike, snuck away to do this interview. I gotta get back pretty soon, don't worry. People disappear in the Finger Lakes.
The farm property is not far from Cayuga Lake and is just north of the city of Ithaca, home of Cornell University.
I went to Cornell. You ever heard of it?
The farm was purchased in January 1935 from the Jersey Milk and Cream Company after it went into receivership. A prominent witness businessman named Anton Kerber helped the society find and buy the property. He was used over the years by Watchtower headquarters in many of its financial and legal transactions. Buildings on the Lansing property at the time of purchase included several houses and barns. There was also a railroad depot from when the New York, Auburn, and Lansing Railroad used to run through the property. 7 horses were included in the sale. Why did the Watchtower Society purchase this farm? The main idea was to provide food for the staff living and working at Watchtower Society headquarters. More specifically, its original service purpose was to supply food in time of emergency for Jehovah's Witnesses in full-time activity with the organization. What time of emergency did the Watchtower Society envision? It's helpful to place the purchase in the timeline of world events. By 1930, Italy is a fascist dictatorship under Benito Mussolini. In 1931, Japan invades Manchuria and soon is warring with China. In 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany and soon becomes its de facto dictator. The first Nazi concentration camp is built that year and starts being used. In 1934, multiple political assassinations are carried out in Europe. The winds of World War are again beginning to blow. The countries that would later form the Axis powers begin to clamp down on the activity of Jehovah's Witnesses. They are banned in Italy in 1932. Japan begins restrictions in 1933, leading to a total ban in 1939. 1933 is also the year Germany confiscates branch offices the Watchtower Society had built just 5 years earlier in Magdeburg. Although the buildings were eventually returned to the Society 6 months later, the literature and meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses remained banned under the Nazi government. Meanwhile, in the United States, hundreds of witnesses were being arrested each year for engaging in their work of door-to-door preaching and literature sales. Would the situation in the U.S. deteriorate further? The outlook was unclear, but the Watchtower Society was not entirely optimistic. During the First World War, the federal government had banned the Watchtower Society's main book at the time, titled The Finished Mystery. Joseph Rutherford, the Society's president, along with 7 other prominent Bible students, had served time in federal prison for writing and distributing the book. Those convictions were later reversed after the war ended. In 1918, the Society's headquarters in Brooklyn had been closed down. It did not seem unlikely that a similar crackdown might occur again. The 1935 purchase of the Lansing farm was one of the contingency measures taken by the organization. The Society published a statement about farms in its Watchtower magazine toward the end of 1935. Curiously, it stated that the Society is not taking possession of or operating farms. Some of the Lord's people have joined together to get possession of lands and establish homes and operate farms for their general good, but that is done aside from the supervision of the Society and is not under the control of the Society. David Abuel was the first witness assigned by the Society to work at its Lansing farm. He arrived there in January 1935. He cared for the 7 horses the Society now owned. A few head of cattle soon joined the horses, and then in the spring of 1935, crops were planted. While the Watchtower Society would later choose the straightforward name Watchtower Farms for its farms in Wallkill, the Lansing farm was named Kingdom Farm, and its workers belonged to the Kingdom Farm Association. Although not connected to Jehovah's Witnesses at first glance, the preaching activity of the farm workers in Lansing soon made its connection evident. This would have repercussions when mob activity against Jehovah's Witnesses flared up in the future. The first year at Kingdom Farm was a challenging one. Floods wiped out many of the crops, along with 2 dams and an old railroad bridge on the property. One of the barns had already been burnt out when Jehovah's Witnesses bought the farm. But the society quickly began to make improvements to the property. A large communal farmhouse was completed by the end of 1935. In 1936, a 216,000 cubic foot dairy barn was built, and modern milking equipment capable of handling 50 milking cows was installed. The society was able to reduce its construction expenses by recycling building materials from another of its properties. Which property was that? In 1924, the society had purchased a sanitarium located in Colesville, New York, about 60 miles east of Ithaca. The sanitarium had been built by Dr. S. Andrell Kilmer after the Kilmer family made a fortune selling a patent medicine known as swamp root. The ingredients of this elixir included water from the sulfur springs in Colesville, various roots and herbs, and naturally a generous amount of alcohol. Dr. Kilmer's sanitarium was constructed so that patients could benefit from the supposedly curative powers of the sulfur springs. It consisted of a 4-story hotel, a building for treatments known as Spring House, a boiler house providing heat and electricity, and a coach house for employees and horses. In order to help business, Dr. Kilmer persuaded area residents to rename the village Sanitaria Springs. After his death in 1924, the sanitarium closed and was purchased by the Watchtower Society. In 1935, the Society dismantled most of the buildings and brought the salvaged building materials to Kingdom Farm for reuse. The coach house, however, was left standing on the sanitarium property. It was an interesting structure, built straddling a creek running through the grounds. The Society continued to own the property until the 1950s, when it was sold to the Myers family. They converted the coach house into a private home. It still exists as a residential home today. Helped along by the Sanitaria Springs salvage materials, Kingdom Farm underwent rapid expansion in the 1930s. The railroad depot on the property was turned into a combination milk processing plant and machine shop. A greenhouse was built, as was a slaughterhouse. A small powerhouse was erected, and 3 diesel engines for providing emergency power were installed. In 1941, a mill elevator was built with the capacity for 15,000 bushels of grain. A puffing machine was acquired for making puffed wheat, corn, and rice breakfast cereal. A carpenter shop was constructed. In 1953, a new combination milk plant, deep freeze, and cold storage building was completed. Several fruit orchards were planted on the property, and an apiary to provide honey was created. The livestock variety expanded. 150 head of beef cattle were acquired, as were hogs, sheep, poultry, turkey, and geese. The Great Show Bull Strathaven Supreme Comrade was purchased as a stud for breeding a high-producing herd of dairy cows. The Watchtower Society eventually entered its herd of Holstein Friesian cattle in the New York State Fair. They won 3rd prize. Water management on the property was greatly improved over the years. The washed-out dams were rebuilt, and miles of drain tile were laid to improve flood control. A 35,000-gallon underground reservoir was built, along with an outdoor swimming pool. In 1938, the Society purchased an adjacent 100-acre property, and in 1953 added another 100 acres, bringing the total Kingdom Farm property to about 800 acres. For 10 years, the Society also owned a second farm in nearby Etna, New York. It was named Carmel Farm, after the verdant agricultural area of Carmel in biblical Israel. A third farm was purchased by the Society in Port Murray, New Jersey, about 60 miles west of Brooklyn. The purchase date of this farm, which the Society named Mountain Farm, has been reported variously as either 1943 or 1953. Bethelites living on the 155-acre mountain farm cultivated fruit orchards and raised dairy cattle. In 1999, the Society sold Mountain Farm to Hunterdon County. It is now part of a county park named the Teetertown Ravine Nature Preserve. After Kingdom Farm was established, Watchtower branch offices in other countries followed suit. In the 1930s, multiple farms were established in Great Britain and Switzerland. By 1943, Australia had more than 20 Kingdom Farms. As time passed, Kingdom Farm in Lansing became a model farm, largely self-sufficient and capable of providing most of the food needed by Watchtower Society staff in New York City. But might there be a further role for this facility?
Jump into the car on a Friday night, I wanna drive with you. Looking for a bar in the nearest town, I've never seen a sky so blue. We don't ever play it and the night is young, it doesn't matter what we do. There ain't nobody like you look so beautiful. And I'm so lucky to be yours. And you're taking me